From blueprints to booming businesses, from groundbreaking to grand openings, this is Beyond the Blueprint. Join host Brad Howard as he takes you behind the scenes of growth and development in Mooresville, Lake Norman, and beyond. We're talking with the decision makers, the planners, the visionaries shaping our communities, giving exclusive insight into what happens before, during, and after projects that define our region. The future is being built right now. Let's go beyond the blueprint.
Thank you to those tuning in on the radio on 105.9 FM, 100.7 FM, 1400 AM, on social media, WSICnews.com, and on demand with the WSIC News app. This is Beyond the Blueprint, where we pull back the curtain on projects and development shaping the future of Lake Norman. I'm your host, Brad Howard, and in every episode, we bring you inside conversations with the people driving growth in our communities, from town leaders and business owners to developers and visionaries. I've lived and worked in this region my entire life and witnessed the changes and growth firsthand. Our goal and our focus is helping people understand what happens beyond the blueprint, because our future is being built right now. Today's show goes beyond the blueprint in an open conversation, taking a deeper dive into the development process, into private development and how it happens. And we're joined today by Ben Geisler, president of Treenail Development, who is making a big splash in Huntersville with his Town 1 development. I'm sure the listeners may know you. Some may not, but let's learn, who is Ben Geisler?
Thanks, Brad, and welcome, everyone. I think I'd say, first and foremost, I'm a neighbor. My family, we live here. We've been here 19 years, almost 20. I feel like when you get to 20, everyone looks like you're from here. At 19,
and you're a local.
At local.
20, yeah.
So we've been here almost 20 years. And that neighbor approach is really how we run our projects and how we run our business. We're here to stay, and try to be respectful of the community and its needs, respectful of the neighbors around our projects. I think we have a good relationship with most of our towns and elected officials and suppliers in the area up here. You mentioned Town 1. That's one of our projects. We generally have 3 to 4 projects of different sizes going at any one time. Town 1 is the largest project that we have going in the Lake Norman area. It's a large 70-acre mixed-use project with residential, commercial, office, and retail components to it. On the southwestern side of Huntersville, we'll talk about that a little bit, I think, in the second segment.
We will.
And that's a quick run through.
That's a quick run through. And the one question that I wanted to ask first was, how in the world did you go from motorsports into building and development? Did you fall and bump your head? I mean, how did we get from one world to the other?
Yeah, I would say I'd put it to 2 things. So you mentioned motorsports. I ran a sports marketing agency that did a lot of work in NASCAR for about 12 years out of Atlanta before moving here to Davidson. Spent, I think, 14 years as chief marketing officer for the World of Outlaws, the dirt track sprint car racing series with the cars with the wings on top that flip over and to make the highlight reels.
They're fun.
They're fun.
They're fun.
Playing in the dirt is what we were doing. And
right.
Now here I am today, still sort of playing in the dirt.
And you have to just clean it out of your ears. Yeah.
Yeah. But really, going back to 2014, my brother was living in Troutman, wanted to move down to the Davidson area. I was in a transition, living in Davidson, but needed to be somewhere different. And we had grown up on a farm north of Pittsburgh and wanted a little more property. And everything we found at the time was either too big, too small, and a little bit of kind of Goldilocks. We couldn't get it right. And we found a piece of property that we liked where it was in Davidson, and sort of being the stubborn sons of a farmer, but also kind of having that anything's possible view of the world from a racer's perspective. Decided, what would it take to do a subdivision to create the lots that we want?
Right.
And went and knocked on town hall. Met Jason Burdett, the planning director in Davidson, Trey Akers, who's a planner in Davidson, and they were kind enough to sit down with us and literally start from scratch. We had done a little work in rental properties and that kind of thing, but nothing ground up like this. And they didn't scare us off. and, kind of started down the process of getting connected up with a civil engineer, a land planner, a planning attorney, and a number of the other kind of consultants and cogs in the wheel that make the development happen from scratch.
Right.
And everyone, told us to figure it was going to be a 12 to 18 month process. About 3 years later, we broke ground, getting through the permitting process.
And I think a lot of people don't realize it takes that long.
Yeah. I think we'll talk some more about that.
We will. We'll dive into that.
And the broke ground, and it was supposed to take 4 months. And 9 months later, we have lots and road. And I distinctly remember sitting there with my brother one day towards the end of the process, and said, man, I really kind of enjoyed that. I mean, it was hard. It was challenging. I got to work with, the person at the bank, the person on the bulldozer, and everyone in between.
Right.
And ended up with some folks who, created their forever homes as a result of the work that we had done. Mm-hmm. And he kind of looked at me like I was crazy that I had enjoyed any part of the process, because he didn't.
Most people would.
And the next thing I said to him was, but man, that'd be a miserable way to make a living. And he said, you got that right. So that's a little how we got into it. And then from there, it just kind of grew.
Okay. Well, good. So, so you started with that personal project you're talking about, and then what'd you do next? So you all of a sudden now you have your hard hat, you're a developer, right?
Sure. Right. Still working full time at the time.
Okay.
Part of the reason probably why it took longer than it should have. But it took our time and met a number of great folks around the region who served as great mentors and advisors. And, I had worked in motorsports for I'm 48 years now, old now. I was, 38 years at the time. And I think I sold my first program at a racetrack when I was 7 or 8. So at the time I had spent 30 years working in motorsports and was just ready for something different.
Yeah.
And, over the next 3 or 4 years, kind of started to gradually decide this is something we wanted to do full time. And myself, my brother still works in motorsports, doesn't have anything to do with what we're doing today. And started off looking for other opportunities for kind of large custom home estate lot type subdivisions. That first project was 6 lots. We've got a couple projects we've done, 18 lots, 20 lots, 1 to 3 acre type homes. And then, from there ran into an opportunity on property in Huntersville where there was a 20 acre piece of that property that was available to us, and stepped back, looked at it, and kind of one thing led to another, and went through a full on rezoning right in the middle of 2 pretty contentious rezonings. And
you had never done a rezoning before?
Had not, no. So we went sort of full Monty on the first one. But I look forward to talking about that a little more here.
Absolutely. I imagine backgrounds and everything else. So Ben goes from motorsports to, hey, I want to build a house here, and let's subdivide it, to now let's do a subdivision, and now let's do a large scale, regionally significant project. So we'll start diving into those details on Town 1 when we come back, and how the development process works. I'm Brad Howard, and this is Beyond the Blueprint. We'll be right back. And we're back on Beyond the Blueprint with Ben Geisler and Treenail Development, and we are getting ready to get into the weeds on how to pull off a large real estate development. We won't even go with the smaller ones. We got an overview on those. Let's go straight into Town 1. You started with the last segment, and you said you wanted 20 acres of land. Did you have an idea what you wanted to do with that 20 acres, or did you just say, let's start here?
Had someone approach us and had that property available and interested in developing it. They'd held it for 15 years or so. So started doing our homework, and realized that there was a CAT station that was going in on the south side of Hambright. So our property really runs from I-77 along Hambright Road west to Mount Holly Huntersville Road, and then Mount Holly Huntersville Road north for about a mile or so until you get to the first developed properties just south of the DMV up there. And then all the way across to 77. And the CAT station's going in just south of our property on the opposite side of Hambright. And that opened us up for a transit-oriented development.
And the CAT station being a terminal.
Yeah, park and ride, CAT's
facility.
park and ride, and
you got an exit as well.
Yeah, so there's an HOV exit there, and so started to do our research again. Certainly better educated this time than we were during the first few projects, but same process.
Right.
Reach out to the town, talk to planning staff, talk to planning director.
But a brand new town this time, so it's not the same people.
Yeah. So town of Huntersville, obviously, versus town of Davidson. Both were great to work with.
Mm-hmm.
We've worked in other jurisdictions as well. But I think the interesting thing is, as we started digging into the project, we recognized that, there was a much larger opportunity than just developing this 20 acres down the middle.
Okay.
There were actually 11 parcels out there. Over the course of a couple of years, 18 months, we did an assemblage. So we were able to acquire 10 of the 11 parcels, 70 to 71 contiguous acres in that quadrant. And that opened us up for a much larger project. And I think that's probably a good place to start, is just talking about the land itself.
Right.
I'd say if you look at the growth in our area, Lake Norman, most people probably, like myself, moved here in the last 25 years, many in the last 5 or 10 years, and certainly a group that moved here 30 or 40 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if everybody, when they pulled in their driveway tonight, looked around them and stopped and paused for a minute and realized that at some point in time, this was someone's farm.
Well, if they pulled in a driveway, it was someone's farm.
Yes. When I look at the property that we assembled at in Huntersville, it's interesting. There were a number of parcels that were sort of road frontage, 1 to 3 acre type parcels that were subdivided off at some point in time.
Right.
Most of these were done in the 60s, 70s. That built right around the time 77 was actually being built.
Right.
That all that property down there was originally someone's farm.
Right. And it probably got cut in half by the interstate.
It did. It was an interesting group of landowners. We had somebody who had bought 15 acres that they needed for their business 15 years ago. We had a gentleman who was a sheriff and was 89 years old and still living independently.
Wow.
Had been there since the house was built in the 60s. We had a woman who was transitioning into long-term care and working through all the different pieces that go along with trustees and her direct heirs and indirect heirs. There was an investor who had bought raw land 10 years ago. There's another investor who had bought a house. And it's interesting as you develop land, it always starts with the land.
Right.
Rarely do any of us developers have this big bank of land sitting aside that we say, oh, I'm going to go do that now.
Starts with your canvas.
Yeah.
Right.
And then it starts with the stories of the people who you are trying to acquire that land from. And I think that's really important for people to understand. And it wasn't the case in this one, but oftentimes it is an old landowner, a farmer. We have that in one of our projects right now where we bought the whole piece from one family. Mm-hmm. In this case, like I said, it was sort of different situations. But ultimately, it was, even for the folks who this was their home, it was their investment.
Right. It's their retirement.
It's their retirement. And they each had their own needs and wants, amount of time they wanted to stay in the property, what they needed to find next. But for each and every single one of them was a really important investment. Involved their family members, involved their attorneys, involved advisors and friends. And I think that's really important for people to understand when you see land being acquired or developed near you. That was somebody's investment, whether they bought that 5 years ago or they've lived there for 50 years
and farmed it.
Yeah. And that's a big part of the process around here. There are not very many just big virgin land tracts available anymore in Lake Norman. A lot of the land that we have in Lake Norman is hard land. It's got topography, it's got streams, it's got power lines. The easy land's been gobbled up. But we still continue to have amazing demand in this area, so it supports the type of growth that we're seeing in this area.
Mm-hmm. So you acquired the land. What do you do next? I mean, you said before you got engineers. I mean, did you get land planners, or did you just sketch out what you wanted? How did Town 1 come into fruition, I guess?
Yep.
As a lot of people don't understand how the development process works. So the point of today is to help people understand that you assemble land, and you try to assemble as robust a piece as you can, and then you step back and you listen to the stories and try to paint something on that land. So
yeah, I think in this case it was again, it starts with that knock on a door at town hall
right.
early in the process, not after we have it all acquired.
Right.
And we took a very collaborative approach with Town of Huntersville, with Brian Richards and Jesse James, planning staff there, as well as the mayor and commissioners at the time, and looking at, what did they see for this southwest portion of Huntersville. And one nice thing for us was there was a fairly blank slate. We didn't have a lot of rooftop slide neighborhoods next door. There wasn't a defined architectural style.
Was there a small area plan or anything?
In the 2040 plan, it called for a mixed use node built around the I-77 and the CAT station. So it was a place that was appropriate for growth.
Right. And so you built it where it was supposed to be.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And I think that's, people don't realize sometimes either, is, this case, it was a rezoning.
Right.
But the land use plan supported the type of use from a long-term vision perspective. The community had spent time saying, this is what we think belongs here, and we tried to work within those parameters. Mm-hmm. I won't say every developer, myself included, always works 100% inside those parameters. Right. Sometimes the economics of the situation, we need a little bit of help, a little support
and sometimes the markets change what a long-range plan looks like, because it is a long-range plan, and the free market ultimately drives.
So that's the other part of the process, right? We're working with planning staff, but we're also working, in our case, we are what I would call a horizontal developer. So we're going in, taking the land, doing the entitlements, putting the plan in place. Then we'll carry things through permitting. We'll do all the horizontal improvements, roads, utilities, sewer, water, et cetera. And then we partner with a vertical developer, someone who's going to build the homes or build the apartments or build the townhomes or build the office or build the retail. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes we do partner with them. We don't just sell it outright. So we're in that process, and we're working with them to see what they need out of the property. Mm-hmm. How many units are effective for them? How much is too much? How does the layout need to work? While also juggling comments from neighbors, comments from planning staff, comments from commissioners. So that's part that I enjoy. Is it is a very collaborative process, and I think for people who struggle with development that might be happening in their neighborhood, I'd really encourage them to step back sometimes and try to take that collaborative approach. I think a lot of our developers in Lake Norman, certainly our local developers, really are open to that feedback. Now, we can't always do everything that somebody wants us to do, but oftentimes we can find ways to scratch an itch or to move something a little bit, to make something a little better for someone.
Yeah.
And
because you're not trying to be adversarial, because you're their neighbor.
Yeah.
Right?
So that then brought on the rezoning process, which is that in of itself took over a year, planning and rezoning. We were approved in June of 23. You sit here today and you say, well, why haven't you turned any dirt yet? That rezoning is the first step of the process. Since then we have been working on construction documents for the site, for the streets, the utilities. We've been going through approvals with Charlotte Water for sewer, with NCDOT for offsite traffic improvements, with the town of Huntersville for earth disturbance and streets cross sections.
Let's touch on that real fast, because we've had 2 other episodes where traffic and infrastructure have come up. Typically, when a private developer comes in to do, especially a large-scale development, you do a traffic impact analysis, mm-hmm. and then the town requires that developer, i.e. you in this case, to go in and install off-site road improvements to mitigate the traffic that you're creating.
Yep. Yeah, I'd say it's an important piece for people to understand. There are 3 people that build roads. There are private developers, there are towns or counties, and there's the state. When we come in with a project over a certain threshold size, it varies by jurisdiction, a private developer is required to do a traffic impact analysis, and it goes out and evaluates and says, the wait time at this intersection is 3 minutes, and that is a C. And you then model and say, once you pour all of our traffic into that from our development, wow, it's going to be 4 minutes and it's going to be a D.
Right. So, and the way that they know that is you've done a concept plan that lays out all the uses, and you know how many cars in your access points and how many cars are going to be coming in and out. So you know how many trips, when it's all built out, are going to be generated.
Yep.
So you're solving for those new cars that are coming. So, the other improvements are still back on the state and the county, but all the new traffic that's being generated is you're taking care of that.
Yeah, and then it's the onus is on the private developer to mitigate that traffic impact that is directly as a result of that development. And we don't get a certificate of occupancy, we don't get a CO in our buildings until we've completed those traffic improvements. That's for projects over a certain threshold. The state has a requirement to use their dollars to build roads, as do our towns. The challenge is they're supposed to be building enough roads to accommodate all the smaller growth that's happening. And unfortunately, our towns are oftentimes cash strapped as a result of a number of different factors. The state is also cash strapped. So we see traffic building, even though the private development community is holding up their leg of the stool. That's a real challenge for us.
And we'll touch on that before we move into the next segment here. So this is Brad Howard. We're on the Blueprint, Beyond the Blueprint, and we'll be right back. And we're back on Beyond the Blueprint with Ben Geisler and Treenail Development, and we were wrapping up on Town 1 before we move on to one of his next developments, but we were discussing traffic impact analysis, road infrastructure, who pays for what, cities, counties, towns, and I will let you keep going with that comment.
Yeah, I think we were talking about kind of whose responsibility is to build roads in our region, and we talked about the fact that the private development community is held accountable to mitigate the traffic that comes as a result of larger projects. Again, with that expectation that our towns and or NCDOT are building out their portions, their forecasts, and it's a real challenge though because NCDOT is, I think you've talked about it on the show, is woefully underfunded. NCDOT is a great entity. There's good people that work there. They don't not want to build roads. They don't want to watch Highway 150 or Highway 73 get delayed over and over and over again. Not ineptitude. No. It's just a question of funding.
It's a funding issue.
And it's a real challenge, I think, we need to have a conversation with our state legislators about as we continue to lower taxes in the state of North Carolina. It's a great thing. We all want that. But it also impacts the dollars that are available for infrastructure. And in particular, in a state like North Carolina, where we are set up at the state level to be more reactive than proactive in terms of infrastructure.
Yeah, if it's not broken, it doesn't get fixed.
Yeah. And then again, our local towns, it's the same thing, right? Nobody wants more property tax, but everybody wants more roads.
Right.
And
the roads are funded primarily through the gas tax.
Yep. There are some funding mechanisms coming into our towns, potentially, the penny tax coming as a part of the red line. A portion of that will go to roads, not just to the red line, rapid transit, but it's a real challenge. We're fortunate and blessed that we all love living here. More people want to be here, just like we wanted to be here when we decided that we wanted to come here. Do I sit in longer traffic to get from point A to point B today than I did 20 years ago? Absolutely. Is it a lot better than when I lived in Atlanta 20 years ago? Absolutely. But I think, separate from traffic, when you talk about a project like Town 1, where does it go from here? Mm-hmm. We're going through it's a long, arduous, detailed permitting process with multiple civil engineering firms, along with multiple vertical development partners that has been ongoing since June of 23, looking out to probably breaking ground this fall. And
so this fall, you'll be on a hard hat and a shovel?
I will not be with the shovel in hand. I do spend time on my sites, though. I really only develop in Lake Norman because I do want to be present. I like driving through them. I like looking at things. Most of the neighborhoods where we develop, I know the people who live next door to us. I wave at them. I know their kids. But we'll spend 9 months just doing site work, just building roads and putting utilities in before anything happens in terms of vertical construction. So
with rain, it could be longer.
Yeah. So we started in June of 21 looking at acquiring land. We rezoned in June of 23. We're, say October of 25 when we break ground. We'll be doing pretty well summer of 26 to start our vertical construction. And, those are 2 to 3 year build outs. So that puts us at 2029. So now you're talking about 8 years to bring more office, more retail, more residential online. And I think that's another piece that people people don't really realize. Like they don't see the first 6 years or 5 years of the process. They see the first shovel in the ground when something goes vertical, and then still wonder why it takes 2 or 3 years to build out.
So on that timeline, when people, were hearing that there were 700 and some odd multifamily units approved, from the time that they were approved and their actual will be occupied is almost 8 to 10 years.
Yeah. And
they all don't come online at one time.
No. And I think that's another thing that, living around Lake Norman, oftentimes I know we hear it from our town officials that they'll get a phone call going, how did you approve this? And the reality is it got approved 5 years ago. And it just took that long to get through the permitting process but in the meantime, people aren't stopping moving to our region.
Right.
And it's a very complex process. It's a lot of brain damage on every front for everybody involved. The outcome, though, and I think what our towns in Lake Norman do really well and probably don't get enough credit for is really promoting quality development, quality architectural details, quality land planning, open space. You can drive through some jurisdictions in other states and other parts of North Carolina, and things don't look and feel as nice as they do
it's
here.
Just haphazard.
And I told the town of Davidson that when we first really got into our first project with them, I said, I think to be fair, my brother and I moved to this region unknowingly because of the good work that you do. We liked the way it felt. Mm-hmm. We made a conscious decision because of the good work the planning team does to put our roots down here and move our family here and bring extended family here and really stay the long term. I said, I have a feeling, my life's going to be a little more miserable over the next couple of years working with you because of the good work that you do.
That's right.
Versus some other jurisdictions that do let developers kind of run off and do their own thing. And I think there's an argument for both sides of that, but I do think it's really important for folks to understand that our planning departments around here are pretty stringent and pretty proactive about looking for the right type of development.
Right. And they're also, everybody is very nice to work with. I mean, you agree or disagree with them. I think everyone has a good working relationship.
Yeah.
So, and on that note, so we were talking about transitioning different relationships. The smaller developments you've done, I want to touch on those before we get to the end of the segment. We have a few minutes. How did they happen as opposed to this a mega development like Town One?
Yeah, I mean, so for example, we have a 20 lot subdivision in Davidson that happens to be in Iredell County, and there was a gentleman, he's 83, 84 years old, bought property in the 80s, about 38 acres on what is now the backside of Anniston, neighborhood that has expanded through the years, and had reached a point in time where he needed that money. That was in large part his investment. He had bought a couple of rental houses in Cornelius, and he had bought this land out in Iredell County, for a fair number in the 80s that is, a fraction of what it is worth today, and much simpler process. But that still took us over 2 years to get from, hey, we want to do this together, to we're going to put a shovel in the ground, and we are 2 years on from that date now, and just having the first people move into houses.
Right.
So it's and I would say that's about as, I won't say it's simple. There are none of these projects that are easy.
I was going to say that one is not simple from memory. I mean, that was a landlocked piece of property, so it takes creativity, and that's where the developer hat comes on, and you understanding how to navigate those decisions.
Yeah, there had been a few. There had been a developer who'd walked away from the property at one point in time, a number of years back. Had some pretty significant topography to it, a lot of rock. It was a well and septic neighborhood, so we didn't have city sewer and city water, which means you have to find areas that will support septic. It was challenging. I kind of like the challenging property. I think in the end, it creates a project that has more character. And that neighborhood's Copper Pine. It's AR Homes, Arthur Rutenberg Homes out of Cornelius is the builder in there, and the people who have come into the neighborhood have kind of they drive in and go, wow, this feels different. We didn't cut all the trees down on the lots. As a matter of fact, we didn't cut any of the trees down. we let the private, the customer come in, work with the home builder to determine which trees they want to cut down to put their house and driveway and pool in. And we encourage them to keep trees. And that's an example of a project that, on the outside, it's pretty straightforward. Mm-hmm. And then you realize, there were old deed issues on the property that had to be squared away. There were problems with Duke Power to get across a power easement for some things we needed to do. We found rock in the road. We had to blast for that rock out of the road. So it's just, even the ones that you think, wow, this is going to go pretty smooth. You wake up one morning and you go, what?
Yeah.
Where did that come from?
Yeah. You get into it. Yeah. There's rock, there's topography, there's all sorts of issues. Then you have easements and to deal with. So no, it's not an easy process, but we're going to dig a little bit deeper when we get right back. Beyond the Blueprint with Ben Geisler. And we're back on Beyond the Blueprint, and we are joined by Ben Geisler with Treenail Development, and we're going to jump around topics here a little bit. We talked about two of your projects already and how you got there. Let's talk about what you see going forward, and then we'll dive into some local issues on the development side and get your thoughts.
Sure. We touched on it a little bit. Certainly, we're going to continue to see growth in our region. I think it's going to come really, three different types. There's going to be infill development. We're going to start seeing smaller properties get developed or redeveloped. We're going to see there are still some standalone, I'm call it family farms, family land holdings that we're starting to see develop, and those will develop really in two ways. Those will develop in either exclusively residential, depending on where they are from a zoning perspective, the uses that are allowed in that area, or in a lot of places we'll see mixed use projects like at Town One. And all three of those play a really important role in the growth of Lake Norman and the managed growth of Lake Norman. I think it's important for people to understand it. There's, as developers, we don't just get to go and say, oh, there's a piece of property, we want to build this on that. There's a lot of guidelines and regulations in place. Our elected officials do have some margin for changing some of those if they feel like a project is sort of generally beneficial and appropriate for the area. I think on the infill side, we're certainly seeing that in downtown Mooresville, downtown Huntersville, downtown Davidson, starting to see that in Cornelius. And I think that will certainly continue. A lot of our, I'm going to say smaller developers, home builders, historically have sort of led those initiatives. So, it's not always a developer who is developing land. Oftentimes it is a home builder who is developing land for their own home building company.
Right.
And when you see one house on 2 acres get torn down to build 10 houses on 2 acres, one side of you says, man, that's 10 more families, that's 10 more groups of kids, that's more traffic on the road. The flip side is those 10 are more affordable on a per unit basis than what one would be if it was bought and rebuilt. And I know we'll probably touch on affordable housing a little bit.
We will.
But I think that density is important, that we do see a smart use of some of those infill lots. I
was going to say on the density issue, a lot of people may not understand how that works in affordable housing, and not affordable housing, but keeping housing affordable. The cost of the land is a large driver, and how many units you can put on it, then whatever the requirements are from the municipality or the county or the local government on additional services that are required. And you want to touch on that and how that impacts housing affordability?
Yeah. I think it's depending on the type of product that you're putting in, raw land costs can be anywhere from 20 to 30% of the cost of the ultimate unit.
Right.
And that has gone up. In part because of, the fact that it takes now 2 or 3 years or 4 years to get through that permitting process instead of 1 or 2 years. And part of that is because developers are being held to a higher standard That's a good thing. But that also drives costs up, both in terms of time and the interest carry and have to remember this is a business just like car dealer is a business, just like a restaurant owner has a business. That there are margins that have to be met.
Right.
Most developers have investors, multiple investors, and those same things that make our communities what we want them to be also add cost to the projects. And it's a delicate balance between, we want to build an affordable product, but we have to do A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, all of which, by the way, drive up the cost of the product because we need brick on the front. We need 4 street trees instead of 2. We need a 5-foot sidewalk instead of a 3-foot sidewalk. We need so on and so forth throughout the process. All things that make the product better, but drive that cost up.
So how do you solve for that?
I think the good news is that conversations really started to happen over the last couple of years in Lake Norman. I think if you went back 4 or 5 years ago, there was not a lot of conversation about housing affordability in our region, and there's a lot of conversation happening now. Certainly, there's some towns that had been a little further ahead of that curve than others, but I think it's innovative solutions that are. It really needs to be a 3-legged stool. Private, public, and nonprofit to tackle this issue. I draw a parallel sometimes where someone will be angry with a developer because they're not building affordable housing or because housing is unaffordable. And I'll say, you get angry at the grocery store because your eggs are expensive. But I do think as developers, we do bear some responsibility. And I like to think our grocery stores would say the same thing and generally get involved, but they're not the only people solving the problem.
Right.
And I think there are some good ways, some, sort of happy compromises. I pitched one to one of our towns recently. For example, we talked about land is 20 to 30% the cost of a unit. Mm-hmm. We have towns where they have a 30% or 50% open space requirement. So we go in as a developer, we buy 20 acres.
And you can only build on 10.
We can only build on 10. So consequently, the land doubles that cost basis for those units. We have to build more expensive houses so we can recoup those costs. I pitched and said, well, if we're willing to build affordable housing in that project, could we use a portion of that open space? We get 10% of the open space back to put affordable housing on. Now, as a developer, we look at it and say that land's free. That takes a cost out of those units and give us another 10% that we can put market rate units on as an incentive. Well, now when we go to our investors, banks, we can say, hey, we've effectively removed the land cost for these affordable units and these incentivized market rate units. Mm-hmm. And we can use some of the profits that come along with those additional market rate units to further subsidize the affordable units. The dollars have to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
And
it's like the roads.
Yeah. And you end up with a project with 30% open space instead of 50% open space. All the units still built to those same high standards. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a real opportunity for some of that type of give and take with our local elected officials and planning officials. And I think that's what it's going to take because the money has to come from somewhere to subsidize those units. And right now, I'm going to say the little bit of affordable housing that we're seeing, which is, we have 8 to 10 units in kind of each one of our projects, our larger scale projects. We're seeing, 5 units here, 15 units there. Those are just being subsidized by the other market rate units in a project. So if you have 200 apartments in a project and 15 of them are affordable, the same returns are being generated. You have to have the same revenue. It means the other 185 apartments are just charging a little higher rent.
Right.
And that's not really a sustainable solution either. It contributes to the problem. But I think there are some opportunities like that as a region to look at some creative solutions. We also have some towns who are looking at some of their excess land, churches that are looking at some of their excess land, universities that are looking at some of their excess land.
Yeah. And I know several of our local jurisdictions are being proactive, and they have, and you're on in one municipality, the Affordable Housing Committee, trying to help find solutions for that, and that committee's replicated in most of the towns.
Yeah, absolutely. look, it's an issue that we all recognize. I'm glad everybody's talking about it. I'm glad some of us are doing something about it.
I'm glad you're doing something about it, not just talking about it.
Yep.
Because there's been a lot of talk for a lot of years.
Yeah.
And action means a lot.
Yeah. And I think that's another thing that people need to consider when they have an adverse reaction to whatever that development is that goes in on their street or in their neighborhood or in their region. If it's office space, someone has decided that there's not enough office space in this area. That office space is,
and there had to be some demand for it. Otherwise, the bank wouldn't approve the loan because there would have to be a third-party market study, which goes back to how does development happen?
Right. And, someone has said, wow, there's so little office space in this area that people are charging $40 a square foot. We think we can make money at $36 a square foot. Well, supply, demand, if you look across the country, and Austin was a perfect example, Texas is unique in that they are very proactive in building infrastructures. They built a ton of infrastructure. Developers went in and built a lot of units.
Mm-hmm.
Rents went down significantly, not like a little dip. They went down significantly, almost to where they were attainable, affordable by the definition of the 80% AMI affordable. No, was that great for developers?
Bad for the developer. Right?
Not great, right? Except City of Austin had some really great tax abatement to encourage you to go that last little mile to get from reasonably affordable to actually affordable. And they sat down with their banks or investors and said, this makes sense. Not suggesting we need to build like crazy, but I think if you look at the affordability of our region, it is telling us that there's not enough inventory.
Right. So housing affordability, smart managed growth. What other topics would you like to hit on?
I just go back to that where I started. We're neighbors, and the developer who's working in your neighborhood, whether they're actually a local developer or not, they own that land. They're a neighbor. Planning staff who you may disagree with, they live in this area. They're a neighbor.
They're your neighbor.
The commissioner who is being faced with a really difficult decision to support smart growth or vote against growth because there's a group of neighbors who are disappointed that that's what's going to happen near them. I think if we all just remember that we're all neighbors and all really looking for the best outcome for our region.
It sounds good. Thank you again, Ben, for joining us. And I think that is the best takeaway. We are all neighbors. And, instead of just getting upset when you hear about a project, maybe call the developer, sit down, have coffee, have a conversation, talk about what the issues are, and see if you can be a little more amicable about it. But okay.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me, Brad. And I hope everybody had a takeaway or two from the last hour we talked.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And this is Beyond the Blueprint with Brad Howard